In the heart of a vast and prosperous African kingdom, where towering baobab trees stood as ancient sentinels and golden savannas stretched beyond the horizon, traditions ruled the lives of its people. Among these traditions one stood unshaken: the practice of arranged marriages where love was a luxury and duty was paramount. Families saw their daughters as bridges between clans, tools to secure alliances and symbols of honor. Amid this world of expectations lived a young girl named Ebony. Unlike most girls of her age who had long accepted their fate, Ebony was different. She was spirited, with eyes that gleamed with untamed curiosity and a heart that yearned for something beyond what was dictated to her. From a young age she had marveled at the stories of love, tales whispered by village elders of queens who had chosen their own destinies and found happiness on their own terms. She would often sit by the river watching its waters flow freely, dreaming of a life where she too could choose her own path. Her parents, however, saw things differently. They were respected figures in the kingdom, bound by the laws and customs passed down for generations. To them, marriage was not about love, it was about duty, honor, and survival. They believed that a woman's greatest achievement was a secure marriage, one that brought wealth and stability to her family. And for Ebony, they had already made a choice: a wealthy elder, a man 3 times her age, who had offered riches beyond measure in exchange for her hand. The decision was final. There would be no arguments, no pleadings, no dreams entertained. Her fate had been sealed, like a bird locked in a gilded cage, its wings clipped before it even had the chance to soar. As the wedding day approached, Ebony felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her. But deep within her, a small ember of defiance still burned. Could she truly accept a life that was not her own? Or was there a greater path waiting for her, one written by forces more powerful than tradition itself? Unbeknownst to her, fate had already begun to weave its own plans that would change the course of her life forever. The evening sky was painted in hues of amber and deep crimson as Ebony sat outside her family's hut, running her fingers through the soft earth beneath her. The village was alive with the sound of drums and laughter, but in her heart, there was only a deep, unshakable silence. She had sensed for weeks that something was amiss, that her parents were keeping a secret from her. And tonight, that secret would finally be revealed. Her mother and father summoned her into their hut, their expressions stern yet unreadable. Ebony obeyed, her heart pounding against her ribs. As she sat before them, her mother adjusted her headscarf and spoke with a tone that carried both pride and finality. "Ebony, your time has come. You will be married to Chief Odwale in 2 moons. It is an honor for our family." The words crashed over her like a sudden storm, leaving her breathless. Chief Odwale? The name alone sent chills down her spine. He was powerful, wealthy, and held influence over many villages, but he was also feared. Stories of his cruelty were whispered among the people, of how he ruled with an iron fist, of how his wives lived in quiet misery, never daring to defy him. Ebony's hands trembled. "No, no, I cannot marry him," she gasped. Her father's face darkened. "This is not for you to decide, child," he said firmly. "This marriage will bring honor to our family. Chief Odwale has offered a great dowry: cattle, gold, land. He has chosen you among many. This is a blessing." "A blessing?" Ebony choked, feeling as if the walls were closing in on her. "You are selling me like I am nothing more than a prize." Her mother's eyes softened, but there was no room for mercy in them. "Ebony, we do this out of love. You will be protected. You will never know hunger or hardship." "But what about happiness? What about love?" Ebony wanted to scream, but she knew it would be useless. Her parents had already made their decision. To them, love was secondary to duty, and a daughter's fate was not hers to shape. The air felt thick, suffocating. She wanted to run, to disappear into the night and never return. But where would she go? Who would help her? Tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. Her silent pleas for help went unheard, swallowed by the unyielding weight of tradition. Her fate, it seemed, had been decided. Or had it? The wedding was a spectacle of grandeur, a celebration that brought together the most powerful families in the kingdom. Drummers played in rhythmic unison, their beats echoing across the land as dancers swayed in colorful garments. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, fresh fruits, and burning incense. The entire village had gathered to witness the union of Ebony and Chief Odwale. But while others saw a ceremony of joy, Ebony felt like a prisoner being led to her cage. Draped in the finest silk, adorned with golden beads in her hair, and painted with intricate patterns symbolizing fertility and strength, she looked every bit the honored bride. Yet inside, her heart ached with every step she took toward the man who would now control her fate. Chief Odwale stood waiting, his imposing figure dressed in layers of regal cloth, his many necklaces gleaming under the sun. His face, marked by years of experience and power, showed neither warmth nor affection, only possession. The vows were spoken, the elders blessed their union, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Ebony's hands trembled in his as he claimed her as his wife. She kept her head high, refusing to let the tears brimming in her eyes fall. That night, she was taken to the chief's compound, a massive estate surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. As the newest wife, she was given a separate chamber, adorned with luxurious fabrics and fine furnishings. But to Ebony, no amount of riches could make this place feel like home. She quickly realized that beyond the compound's beauty lay a world of silent suffering. The chief's other wives, numbering over a dozen, greeted her with cold stares and whispered words of resentment. To them, she was nothing more than another competitor, a younger wife who could gain the chief's favor and diminish their own standing. At first, their cruelty came in subtle ways. Meals prepared for her would arrive late and cold. Her finest garments would mysteriously go missing. Servants who once catered to her needs suddenly ignored her presence. But soon their jealousy turned into open hostility. They would mock her, refuse to let her sit beside them, and leave her alone to fend for herself in a world where alliances meant survival. Still, Ebony refused to let her spirit break. Each night, as she lay in bed staring at the carved ceiling above her, she reminded herself that she was not just a wife to be controlled, she was still Ebony, a woman with dreams, strength, and a heart that would not be silenced. She would endure, but she would not surrender. One evening, as the moon cast its silver glow over the chief's compound, a hooded figure slipped past the guards and into Ebony's chamber. She gasped, ready to call for help, but the figure raised a wrinkled hand in peace. It was Mama Esh, the oldest and most revered seer in the village. "You must listen, child," the old woman whispered, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "The ancestors have spoken to me." Ebony sat up, her heart pounding. She had heard of Mama Esh's visions, stories of past rulers and future kings foretold by her lips. If she had come in secrecy, it must be important. "The wind carries your name far beyond these walls," Mama Esh murmured. "You were never meant to be a chief's wife. You were meant to rule." Ebony's breath caught in her throat. "Rule?" she echoed in disbelief. The seer nodded. "A throne awaits you, but you must endure the trials ahead. Your suffering is only the beginning, but if you remain strong, destiny will find you." Ebony wanted to believe the words, but they seemed like an impossible dream. She was trapped in a life she never chose, married to a man who saw her as property. How could she ever be more than this? Before she could ask further, the door creaked open and a heavy silence fell over the room. Chief Odwale stood in the doorway, his piercing eyes narrowing. He had overheard. "What nonsense is this?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Mama Esh did not flinch. "The ancestors have spoken," she said simply. "You may try to fight fate, but it will not be denied." The chief's jaw tightened. He had built his rule on dominance and fear. He would not allow whispers of prophecy to threaten his control. "Leave," he ordered, pointing a commanding finger at the old woman. Mama Esh did not argue. She simply smiled knowingly at Ebony before slipping into the shadows. Once they were alone, the chief turned to Ebony, his gaze dark with suspicion. "You will stay where you belong," he said. "No more foolishness. No more stories." From that night on, the chief watched Ebony more closely than ever. He forbade her from leaving the compound alone. He restricted her movements, ensured she was constantly surrounded by servants who reported back to him, and dismissed anyone who seemed loyal to her. But deep inside, Ebony's spirit burned brighter. If the prophecy was true, if fate truly had a plan for her, then she would not cower in fear. She would endure. And one day she would be free. Ebony had spent weeks planning her escape. The chief's watchful eyes were always on her, but she had learned the patterns of the guards, the weaknesses in the walls of the compound, and the paths that led beyond the village. She knew the risk, but the words of Mama Esh echoed in her mind. "You were meant to rule." One moonless night, she slipped out of her chamber, heart pounding against her ribs. She carried nothing but a small bundle of food wrapped in cloth. Barefoot and silent, she crept through the compound, avoiding the torchlight of the guards. She had reached the outer fence when a whisper stopped her. "Ebony." She turned sharply, her breath caught in her throat. It was Bako, one of the chief's trusted servants. He had always been kind to her, often slipping her extra food or covering for her when she refused to obey the other wives. You don't have to do this, Bako said, his voice laced with worry. I have no choice, she whispered back. Please, Bako, let me go. He hesitated, his face troubled, but then he nodded. There is a small gate behind the storage hut. It is never locked. Relief flooded her. Thank you, she breathed before slipping away. She reached the gate and pushed it open. Beyond it lay freedom, the thick forest that would swallow her, the path to a new life. She stepped forward, but before she could take another breath, strong hands grabbed her from behind. Abony, a familiar voice growled. It was the chief. Her blood turned to ice. She thrashed, but his grip was iron. Guards rushed forward, binding her wrists. She looked past them and saw Bako standing in the torchlight, his face filled with regret. You betrayed me, she choked out, tears stinging her eyes. Bako lowered his head. I had to tell him, he murmured. He would have found out. The chief's face was dark with fury. You thought you could leave me? He hissed. You belong to me and you always will. Dragged back into the compound, Abony was thrown to the ground before the chief's other wives and servants. He made a spectacle of her, declaring her a disgraceful wife who had shamed him. He ordered her to be locked away, beaten, and starved until she learned her lesson. Days passed in darkness. Her body ached, her stomach twisted with hunger, but her spirit refused to break. Then, in the dead of night, a shadow appeared at the door of her prison. A figure knelt beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her bruises. Do not be afraid, a soft voice whispered. Abony forced her swollen eyes open. It was one of the chief's own wives, Mirembe, a woman who had always been silent, always in the background. Why are you helping me? Abony croaked. Mirembe's eyes glistened with sorrow. Because I too was once like you. And because your fate is greater than his. She pressed a small knife into Abony's palm and leaned in close. Tomorrow night, be ready. I will help you escape. Hope flickered in Abony's chest. Her story was not over yet. Abony drifted between consciousness and sleep, her body weak from the days of suffering. The last thing she remembered was Mirembe helping her escape under the cover of night. She had stumbled through the forest, barely able to keep her feet, before everything went dark. When she woke, the first thing she noticed was the scent of fresh herbs. The air was thick with the aroma of healing plants, and soft light filtered through a thatched roof above her. She was lying on a bed of woven mats, covered in warm blankets. She is awake, a voice said. Abony turned her head and saw a group of figures standing at the doorway. They were dressed in warrior attire, leather armor, beaded necklaces and weapons strapped to their backs. But their eyes were kind, their presence not threatening. One of them stepped forward, a tall woman with deep brown skin and braided hair adorned with golden beads. Her posture radiated authority, but there was warmth in her gaze. You are safe now, the woman said. I am Queen Nyasha, ruler of the Hidden Kingdom. Abony tried to sit up, wincing from the pain in her ribs. Where am I? You are in a place where the oppressed find refuge, Queen Nyasha said. My warriors found you unconscious at the edge of the forest. You are lucky to be alive. Tears welled in Abony's eyes as the memories rushed back, her forced marriage, the betrayal, the cruel chief's punishments. I had nowhere else to go, she whispered. Now you do, the queen said firmly. You are one of us now. Over the next few weeks, Abony was nursed back to health by the healers of the Hidden Kingdom. She learned that this was a secret land, hidden deep within the mountains, where those who had been cast out or wronged by unjust rulers found a home. Queen Nyasha had built it with her people, protecting the innocent and fighting against tyranny. Abony watched in awe as the queen ruled with wisdom and fairness. The people respected her not out of fear but out of love. She saw how the queen made decisions, how she listened to her people's concerns, how she led with both strength and compassion. One evening as they sat by the fire, Queen Nyasha turned to Abony. I see something in you, she said. You have endured suffering, yet your spirit is unbroken. Abony lowered her gaze. I don't feel strong, she admitted. Strength is not about how much pain you can bear, the queen said gently. It is about rising after you have fallen. It is about using what you have learned to build a better future. Abony thought about the life she had left behind, the chains of tradition that had tried to hold her down. Here, in this hidden kingdom, she felt something she had never felt before, freedom. Will you teach me? She asked. I want to learn how to lead, how to fight, how to never be powerless again. Queen Nyasha smiled. Then your journey begins now. And so, Abony trained under the warriors, learned from the elders, and studied the art of leadership from the queen herself. The girl who had once been forced into marriage against her will was now growing into a woman who would carve her own destiny. Little did she know, fate had even greater plans for her. The winds of change swept across the land as news of the chief's crumbling rule spread far and wide. His iron grip on the kingdom had weakened, and the people, tired of his tyranny, had begun to rise. The once loyal warriors were abandoning him, and whispers of rebellion echoed through the villages. Ebony stood atop the high cliffs of the hidden kingdom, looking out toward the land she once called home. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the vast plains. She knew the time had come. She had trained for this moment, not just in battle but in wisdom, strategy, and leadership. The frightened girl who had once been forced into marriage was gone. In her place stood a warrior, a leader, and a queen in the making. Queen Nyasha stood beside her. "The people are ready," she said. "They wait for a leader to guide them." Ebony nodded. "Then we shall give them one." She gathered the warriors of the hidden kingdom, along with villagers who had pledged their loyalty to her. They were not just soldiers, they were farmers, hunters, and healers, people who had suffered under the chief's rule and longed for change. With their support, Ebony would march into her old kingdom, not as a captive but as a liberator. As the army approached the kingdom, they found it in ruins. The once thriving villages were now filled with fear and despair. People hid behind closed doors, too afraid to rise against their oppressor. But when they saw Ebony, their fear turned to hope. "The chief's reign is ending," a woman whispered. "She has returned." "Could it be true?" a young boy asked. "Has she come to save us?" Ebony rode through the streets on horseback, her heart pounding. She saw familiar faces, elders who had watched her grow up, children who had been too young to understand her suffering, and families who had lost everything to the chief's greed. She stopped at the village square, raising her voice so all could hear. "My people, you have suffered long enough," she declared. "The chief has ruled with cruelty, taking from you, silencing you, treating you as less than human. But no more." The villagers stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "We have come to end his reign," Ebony continued. "But I cannot do it alone. This is your kingdom. Stand with me and together, we will reclaim what is rightfully ours." A murmur spread through the crowd. A few men stepped forward, then more, and soon the entire village was rallying behind her. Meanwhile, in the royal compound, the chief sat on his throne, his once mighty presence reduced to that of a sickly old man. His paranoia had consumed him, and he no longer trusted even his closest advisors. The rebellion had weakened his forces, and he knew the people no longer feared him as they once had. One of his guards rushed in. "My chief, the girl has returned. She leads an army, and the people are with her." The chief's hands trembled. "Ebony," he muttered. He had underestimated her. "Gather the remaining warriors," he ordered. "We will crush this rebellion before it begins." But when his soldiers marched to meet Ebony's forces, they found themselves outnumbered. The villagers had joined the fight, wielding whatever weapons they could find, farming tools, wooden staffs, and even their bare hands. The battle was fierce. Ebony fought alongside her people, striking down the chief's men with precision and skill. She moved with the grace of a warrior, her training guiding her every move. As the chief's forces dwindled, he realized his end was near. He attempted to flee, but Ebony caught up to him in the palace courtyard. He turned to face her, his once proud face now filled with desperation. You were nothing but a girl," he spat. "You were mine to control." Ebony stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You were never my master. And this kingdom was never yours to ruin." The villagers gathered, watching in silence as Ebony stood before the man who had stolen her freedom. The chief fell to his knees, coughing violently. His years of cruelty had left him with no allies, no warriors, and no way out. "Spare me," he begged. Ebony looked down at him, her heart steady. "I will not become the tyrant you were," she said. "But you will never rule again." With that, she turned to the people. "This is your home. It belongs to you, not to a single man who would oppress you. Today we take back our kingdom." A thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd. The people surged forward, reclaiming their land, their homes, and their dignity. As for the chief, he was stripped of his power and banished, left to wander the lands with nothing but the weight of his past crimes. The battle was over and the kingdom was free. Ebony stood before her people, no longer a captive, no longer afraid. She had risen from the ashes of her past, and now she was ready to embrace her future. The morning sun cast its golden light over the once oppressed kingdom, now free from the chains of tyranny. The air was thick with joy as the people gathered in the grand courtyard, their voices humming with excitement. The battle had been won and the wicked chief had been cast out, but a greater question loomed over them: who would lead them now? The answer was clear. Abeni stood at the heart of the crowd, the symbol of resilience, wisdom, and justice. The villagers looked to her with admiration, their hearts full of hope. They had seen her rise from an oppressed young woman to a fierce leader, one who had risked everything for their freedom. An elder stepped forward, his wrinkled hands trembling as he held a ceremonial crown woven with gold and ivory. "Abeni, child of destiny," he proclaimed, "the time has come for you to take your rightful place. You have fought for us, suffered with us, and now we ask that you lead us." The crowd erupted in agreement, voices chanting her name. Abeni's heart pounded. She had never dreamed of ruling, but as she looked around she saw the trust in their eyes, the love in their faces. These were her people and she could not turn away from them. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I did not fight for power," she declared, her voice strong. "I fought for freedom, for justice. If I am to lead, I swear before you all, I will lead with fairness, with kindness, and with the strength of those who came before us." The elder placed the crown upon her head. "Then rise, Queen Abeni, ruler of a new era." Abeni lifted her chin as the weight of the crown settled upon her. The people cheered, their voices echoing through the land. At that moment she was no longer the frightened girl who had been forced into marriage. She was a queen, chosen not by birthright but by the will of her people. As the celebrations continued, a familiar sight caught Abeni's eye, her parents standing at the edge of the crowd. Her mother clutched her chest, eyes glistening with tears. Her father, once proud and unwavering, looked down in shame. They had forced her into a life she had never wanted, only to watch her rise above it and become something far greater than they had imagined. Slowly they stepped forward and knelt before her. "We were wrong," her father said, his voice thick with regret. "We thought we were protecting you, but we only caged you. Can you ever forgive us?" Abeni studied them, feeling the weight of the past pressing upon her. She had suffered greatly because of their choices. But she had also grown stronger, wiser. Holding on to hatred would not change what had happened. She reached out, lifting them from the ground. "I forgive you," she said, "but I will never forget. No girl should ever suffer as I did. That is the promise I make as queen." Her parents bowed their heads, understanding the depth of her words. The celebration lasted deep into the night, marking the beginning of a new era. And at its heart stood Abeni, a queen born not from privilege, but from the trials of destiny. The reign of Queen Abeni marked the beginning of a new era, one that would be remembered for generations. Gone were the days when daughters were treated as bargaining tools in marriage, when fear dictated the lives of the people. Under her leadership, the kingdom flourished in ways never imagined before. Her first decree was simple yet powerful: no girl would ever be forced into marriage against her will. This law sent ripples through the land, changing customs that had been upheld for centuries. There was resistance, of course. Elders who clung to tradition, powerful families who sought alliances through marriage, but Abeni stood firm. "Let love, not force, guide the path of marriage," she declared. Women for the first time had a choice in their futures. Young girls who once feared being taken away from their families now dreamed of love, of pursuing knowledge, of shaping their own destinies. Mothers who had once been powerless now found strength in Abeni's rule, knowing their daughters would not suffer as they had. But Abeni did not stop at changing marriage customs. She saw the scars left behind by the former chief's rule. Poverty, division, and fear still lurked in the shadows. She knew that a crown alone did not make a ruler. It was the trust of the people, the fairness of her leadership, that would define her legacy. She traveled to the villages, listening to the concerns of farmers, traders, and healers. She established schools so that children, boys and girls alike, could learn not only about history and survival but about justice, kindness, and wisdom. She built strong alliances with neighboring kingdoms, ensuring that peace, not war, became the foundation of her rule. Her most loyal allies were the warriors who had once rescued her. They became the kingdom's guardians, ensuring that no tyrant would ever rise again. Years passed and Abeni's name became legend. Songs were sung of the young girl who had been forced into marriage, only to rise and reclaim her freedom. Stories were told of the queen who had faced betrayal, suffering, and loss, yet had never let her spirit be broken. She was a ruler unlike any before her, one who had known both the chains of oppression and the sweet taste of liberation. But as time went on, one question remained: what would be her final legacy? One evening, as Ebony stood on the balcony of her palace, watching the sun set over her thriving kingdom, a young girl approached her. "Your Majesty," the girl said, bowing deeply, "I come from a small village far from here. My mother was once promised to a man she did not love, but because of your laws she was able to marry the man of her choosing. And because of that love I was born." Ebony smiled, touched by the girl's words. "But I do not come just to thank you, my queen," the girl continued. "I come because I wish to learn. I want to be a leader like you." Ebony studied the girl's face, seeing in her the same fire she had once carried in her own heart. "Then you shall learn," she said. And so, as the years passed, Ebony mentored young women and men alike, shaping the next generation of leaders. When the time came for her to step down, she did so not with sorrow but with pride. She had done what she was destined to do: change the fate of an entire kingdom and, more importantly, inspire those who would come after her. Legends say that long after her reign, her name was still spoken with reverence. Her story was passed down from mother to daughter, from elder to child, reminding all who heard it that fate, though unpredictable, always had a plan. And so, Ebony's legacy was not just one of rulership, but of hope. A hope that no one, no matter how caged they may feel, is ever truly powerless to change their destiny.